No, hold on. This is 5 Minutes Funnier.
Hi, and welcome to 5 Minutes Funnier, the comedy how-to. I'm your host, Jimmy England, and I have had a request to talk about jokes to gauge the audience. This came from somebody on the reply page who identifies himself as Watermelon John. John, I wanted to get in touch with you and I couldn't find you. So sorry about that, but I am going to deal with what you suggested and talk about jokes that are used to gauge the audience in order for us to tell where we have to go from there. I want to talk about a comedian that a lot of you probably don't know because he was around in the 20th century, and to be honest with you, he was losing relevance by the time you got into the 1970s. So I'm sure there's one, possibly two generations who may not even know who he is. But I want to talk about him briefly, and I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to have my notes in front of me, and I apologize, but there's a lot of details about his life. I'm going to keep it as brief as I can, but I think it's important to know where this guy came from, and then I will tell you about how he fits into the thesis of test jokes engaging the audience. Milton Berle was born in 1908 and he died in the year 2000. He started acting in 1913. He was 5 years old. By the age of 12, he was on Broadway. At the age of 16, he was hosting vaudeville shows and doing stand-up. And as a result, by the time he got to the 1930s, the early 1930s, he was already an established stand-up comedian and appearing on radio shows. And then along came 1948 and the Milton Berle Show on TV. Milton became known as Mr. Television. He basically owned the airwaves for 5-6 years. He was just a giant. Everybody knew Milton Berle. What he had done is he brought his vaudeville act onto stage. It was very broad. It was a lot of slapstick. He would dress up like women. He was Krusty the Clown when you come right down to it. That's who he was. The show lasted until 1956, and after that, he was basically history. He became part of a cadre of comedians who had been big back in the 30s, 40s. I call them the tuxedo comedians because they all seemed to cling to these tuxedos whenever they performed, wherever they performed. Probably because they came up through the ranks some very hard times in vaudeville. If you think traveling as a touring comedian, making minimal wages is tough for you, you would not believe what vaudeville performers had to do. Tuxedos for them represented success, it represented class. They didn't want to take them off, which is unfortunate because by the 1960s, my generation was in the fore and we were very casual and bell bottoms and all the other stuff, and they just looked dated. I saw Milton Berle first at a show called Les Girls, locally here in Hamilton, Ontario. It was a Las Vegas revue featuring girls who were topless. And it was opened by Milton Berle. Now, I won't lie to you, I'm in my 20s. Milton Berle was not the draw. But I have to tell you, I have never laughed so much in my life with any comedian as I did that night with Milton Berle. Most comedians who are on a roll are doing a laugh every 20 seconds. Berle was every 5. I have never heard an audience in such an uproar as I heard that night. I'll be honest with you, I can't remember anything that Les Girls did, but I remember Berle. Now, Berle was recorded on an album being interviewed by a fellow named Larry Wilde. I believe Larry did a number of different interviews with comedians talking about comedy. And when you listen to that particular recording, it's somewhat pretentious because, this time I think it was the 80s or 90s. Berle's been a success for so long. He's got a certain degree of Jerry Lewis-ness to him that he's, I've done it all, I've seen it all, almost condescending to Wilde. But he did talk about comedy, and the man knew comedy. This is where we get back to Watermelon John's question. Milton Berle talked about how when he did a show, he always had some test jokes that he would do at the beginning of a set to see how sophisticated the audience was. This is a man who could be playing in a nightclub in New York City or Los Angeles or wherever, but then could turn up at a state fair. He needed to know what direction to take his act. And he had so many jokes, he could go anywhere. So he would do this. He would say a few jokes and he would gauge the reaction, and that would determine whether he went this way or whether he went that way. Now that's something you can't do as a young comedian right off the bat. You do not have enough material, and that's a shame. But you should be developing it. I ran into it as well when I did a show. I was not the headliner. I was kind of an afterthought. There was a lot of young comedians, but for some reason, they're playing to a bunch of Rotary Club older people. These are people in their 50s and 60s and late 40s and whatnot, and they come in doing stuff that was really going to be funny if you were 18 or 30. But when you get up there, it wasn't quite as funny, and I ended up being the hit of the show. Thank you very much. But it was because I could relate to those people better than they could. I can, by the way, do young people as well, so I'm not just doing stuff for old people, as it were. So yes, test jokes are great. Having so much material that you can go this direction or that direction, great. I think it's worthwhile doing. If you think you can do that, be prepared to go in either direction, and follow the example of Milton Berle. Thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't done that yet. It's very important. And share us with your fellow comedians. That would be great too. In the meantime, have a great week and stay funny, everybody.